So, Vito Scaletta was born in 1925 in San Martino, Sicily, to a very poor family, and his father and mother were Antonio and Maria Scaletta, and his sister Francesca. And they were very poor in Sicily, so they decided to move to Empire Bay for a better life, but little did they know that they would also be in poverty in America. So they came to Empire Bay in 1932, where Vito was age 7, and he moved with his family to Hunters Point, and his father went to work for Derek Popolado as a labourer down at the docks, and life wasn't different for them as they moved into Hunters Point. And as you know, Hunters Point is one of the ghetto kind of poverty-ridden places in the whole of Empire Bay, and there he met his future best friend Joe Barbaro, who was he was the neighborhood bully until Vito and him crossed paths and they had a fight and eventually became best friends. And that leads on to 1943, where they're obviously teenagers, aged 18, I think Joe was 19, and they rob a Kingston jewellery store and try to get away with the goods. But that is not until an on-beat cop is patrolling his area, of course, and eventually arrests them, leading into Vito being sent to World War II to take place in the operations in Italy. And in these operations he was part of Operation Husky, which was an invasion of the Sicily, which is part of Italy, if you know. And there you took I'm getting lost for words here. He'd taken place in some raids and worked with the local resistance to take over towns that were operated by the Axis Italian army. And we get to see this in the first mission, the Old Country, where we'll attack, well, I wouldn't say attack, but try and take over a town in Sicily. And eventually Vito gets hurt until Don Carlo comes along and saves them, leading for Vito to stay in the army until 1945. During this gap of 1943 to 1945, Vito is wounded and receives the Purple Heart, which puts him in the hospital for a couple of months. As I recall, he was shot, and this could have been possibly taking place in the Battle of the Bulge, people speculate. And then Vito gets to go home for a couple of days, and his best friend Joe Barbaro sets him up and gets him out of the army for good. This leads on to him working for the fat man himself, Derek Popolado, as a labourer, until he's too proud of himself and walks away, and eventually being offered a job as a leg breaker, similar to his father, unknown to him though. And this is the start of Vito's criminal path. And eventually they make contact, and Derek finds out that he works and is a good friend with Joe Barbaro, and that eventually leads to working for Clemente and meeting Henry Tomasino, who's Soldato in the Clemente family. And this leads to a gas stamp job where a heist had taken place, and Vito steals some gas stamps and distributes them throughout Empire Bay, and leading also to a jewellery heist where his feud with the Irish first starts, because the crazy bastard himself, Brian O'Neill, drives a van straight through the window, calls the attention of the police, and eventually makes a standoff with Vito and Joe. And the cops arrive, Vito and Joe get away, Brian O'Neill gets banged up, gets put in prison, and Vito and Joe get away with the goods, eventually leading on to a hit against Sydney Penn, which would be their last job for Clemente. And the morning after they kill Sydney Penn, Vito gets arrested for the distribution of gas stamps and is eventually sentenced to 10 years in Hartman Penitentiary. And this is where he meets his mentor, Leo Galante. But he doesn't meet him immediately, because Brian O'Neill finds him once again and fights him in the courtyard. And this shows, well, Leo sees how Vito handles himself and takes no shit from the crazy bastard himself. So Vito is, I would say, recruited into Leo's fight club, and this is where their little fruitful relationship begins. So Vito becomes Leo's best fighter. He fights the black gang, he fights the Asian gang, and eventually killing Brian O'Neill himself after beating up Pepe Costa, which is another Soldato in the Vinci family. And this gains the trust of Leo, and they become very close. And Leo even puts Vito into his cell and looks after him and makes sure that he gets out earlier than expecting. And he was expecting, which would be 1951. So he takes 4 years off his sentence, and Vito is released in 1951. In the 6 years that he's been gone, his best friend Joe Barbaro had been making contacts and became an associate of the Falcone family, who Eddie Scarpa, the underboss of the Falcone family, becomes friends with Vito and gives him a few jobs, and that leads him to meeting Don Falcone, who also gives him the hit of Clemente, which Joe Barbaro and Vito and Joe's friend Marty go against Clemente and kill him, but the job goes bad. The bomb goes off at the wrong time. Marty is eventually killed by Don Clemente, and Joe and Vito go against Don Clemente and eventually kill him. After this, they are in fact made into the Falcone family, becoming Soldatos. That means the life for them will get better and better, which it does. Vito begins his life of luxury, everything that he's always wanted as a child. Buys a house, Joe buys a new car, some fancy suits, and all of this just beating down people, living the life as usual. And this eventually leads to Henry Tomasino knocking on Vito's door, literally knocking on his door, and Vito brings him into the Falcone family, in which, unknown to Vito, Eddie would send him to kill Leo Galante, his mentor and consigliere of the Vinci family. Of course, Vito tries to save Leo, and this is successful as Leo is spared by Henry if you get caught. If you don't get caught, then you drive Leo to the train station and he gets away anyway. But if you do get caught, Henry spares him, and Henry's brought into the family anyway. So Vito eventually goes back home, sees his sister Francesca there, and eventually finds out that her husband, which is his brother-in-law Eric Riley, is a bit of a dick, really. He stays out all night partying, and she's just left at home to cook, clean, whatever, and he's never at home. So Vito finds out that Eric actually hits his sister, so he goes to teach him a lesson, and eventually the Irish gangsters attack Vito's home, burning it down to the ground. Vito losing his money, everything that he's ever owned, and that was retribution for Brian O'Neill's death back in 1945. So Vito and Joe go up to the Hill of Tara and kill every Irish gangster in there, finishing the O'Neill gang in Empire Bay. Now Vito hasn't got that much money left, so this leads to Henry, and Henry was the true downfall of Vito and the rest of the gangs in the city. He gets too ambitious and gets involved with drugs, meaning that he gets Vito and Joe involved too. So they go to Bruno, borrowing 25,000, or was it 22,000, can't really remember, and they buy drugs. So they sell the drugs off, they buy the drugs off the Chinese, which involves them and the Chinese triads factory is attacked and burnt down, which brings some kind of hatred towards them and the tension rising with the family and the triads. And Vito, Henry, Joe all sell the drugs and make a lot of money, but that is until the triads get their own back against Vito and his crew, and they eventually kill Henry. But it's not because their factory is burnt down. That was only one reason, and two birds, one stone for them, is because Henry was also a rat. So Henry is killed, the money is stolen, that leaves Joe and Vito out of pocket and needing to pay back Bruno. So Vito and Joe get to work, but first, being overcome with revenge, they tail Wong back to his restaurant and ultimately killing half, like all of his men, half of the triad in the city, and destroy the heroin business, and eventually killing the enforcer Mr. Wong. And this puts tensions at an all-time high, and all-out war breaks out between the triads and the Vinci, and this leads towards the ending of Vito. Next, they are given a job by Eddie, which involves another family in another city, which we later find out is the Salieri family, and he gives the hit is given to us, and the hit turns out to be Tommy Angelo of the Salieri family and the protagonist of Mafia 1. So Vito and Joe kill Tommy Angelo. Rest in peace, Tommy. Always be in my heart, Tommy, even though you're a rat bastard, but moving on. And they gain a lot of cash from that job to pay back Bruno, but obviously it's not enough, so Vito gets to work and goes to work for Derek, which it is ultimately revealed Derek had his father killed back in 1943. Steve Cohen was the guy to kill him, and Vito kills Derek and Steve and all of his men, and takes his money and pays back Bruno. So all good for Vito, but obviously Joe goes missing, so Vito's driving around the city trying to find Joe from all different kinds of places, and eventually goes to the Mona Lisa and being kidnapped by Frank Vinci. So Joe is discovered to be hung up alongside Vito, and they're both being interrogated by Frank Vinci about what's been happening with the triads and why the triads want to kill him, all because they fucked up. So Vito and Joe escape, and that leads to the next mission, which is the last mission per ad aspera, I think it's called, and that leads to Leo returning to the city from Lost Heaven. Yes, he went to Lost Heaven, and has Vito to go and kill Don Falcone for his drug business, and Mr. Chu wants revenge. So Vito goes up to the observatory, kills Don Falcone, and ultimately thinks that Joe is dead, because Joe is driving away in a different direction to him, and he thinks he's dead because he wasn't part of the deal. So this eventually leads to Vito being in exile because of the whole situation with the triads, and they just don't want any more problems with the triads in Empire Bay, because Vinci is now the most powerful gangster in the city and controls the whole of Empire Bay, seeing as there's no more families anymore. And Vito is sent down to New Bordeaux to work for Sal Marcano, and he's kind of a spy for the Commission and the Vinci family to see what Marcano's up to, because he sends little postcards back to Vito and Leo telling them of the operations that Sal Marcano's got going on. But Sal knows what he's up to, so he's sent to all different kinds of cities across America to keep away from his operations in New Bordeaux. And that's what he's been doing for the last 17 years of his life. Being the shit on Sal's shoe, basically operating the worst part of the city for Sal, and he's eventually brought in on the bank job that he has planned, which he puts up $100,000, I think, for the heist, and he gets the combination for the locks, for the vault, for the the bank place with all the money in. I can't remember what it's called. And eventually Marcano tries to have him whacked, which he cuts off all of his rackets just so that he kind of kick up enough money to send to the Commission, so he had the reason to kill Vito instead of just killing them, so he had permission to kill Vito. But Vito makes him go through every jump hoop to kill him, because he's not going to go out like a bitch. It's Vito Scaletta we're talking about here. And Sal's tried this once before. He tried to have him arrested and created a sting operation towards him, because he had him set up, but the setup didn't work. And this ultimately makes Vito he's kidnapped by Michael Greco's goons and is about to get whacked, but Lincoln Clay comes and saves him, and which is good because he becomes Lincoln's lieutenant and operates out of River Row, out of his restaurant. So during Mafia 3, you can give Vito all your districts, or none of your districts if you really want to, and he gives you side missions to do involving Joe. He has Lincoln going to kill people that were associated with Joe's death, but obviously he doesn't know that Joe's still alive, and has him kill all these people, and then eventually comes out to Lincoln telling them about Joe. There's two ways of this. He can either die in 1968 if you decide to not give him enough territory. Vito decides to try and betray Lincoln and eventually gets killed in his own restaurant. And it's quite sad to see because he's only had bad luck in his life and now he's being killed. But it doesn't have to end there if you pick the right choice. It's not really the right choice, it's up to you really. And that is Vito taking over New Bordeaux, which he gets to live to age, I think it's about 90, no, was it 80? It was like 90 or 80, so he lives up to 2016 and he still runs New Bordeaux, and he's the most powerful guy in the city. Vito makes New Bordeaux into the Las Vegas of the South and builds a whole empire around it, but that ending is probably the best one because from start to finish it's like he's always wanted to be this big time gangster, be the most powerful guy around and stuff like that, and he eventually achieves that throughout that ending, so that's always good. And this has been the full complete life of Vito Scaletta, from zero to hero. No, I just wanted to say that because it sounds funny. But like age 0 to 90 fucking something, I can't remember how old he was, I think it was 92, but oh no, 91 I think he was, but yeah, basically 91 years of Vito Scaletta's life. This has been fun, but it's been a mouthful and it's been very hard to create, so like and subscribe for some more, and I'll be definitely making this into a new series about different characters. Next one will be Leo Galante, Derek Popolaro, anyone you want. And don't forget to join our Mafia community on Twitter. Just inbox us and I'll invite you to it. Talk about a lot of Mafia, and we've kind of got a crazy stalker on there at the moment, so it's quite fun. And yeah, like and subscribe for some more. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.